All right, Harold, we're just waiting for YouTube to start live.
Okay. As soon as you intro me, I'll put up the PowerPoint.
Roger. Okay, here we go. All right, good evening or good morning. Welcome to a brief history of the Telegraph Key, or how many ways can you make a switch webinar. Your panelist for this webinar is Harold Kramer, WJ1B Bravo, a retired ARRL Chief Operating Officer and a past publisher of QST. Please use the Q&A screen to post questions, not chat. After the webinar closes, you may use WJ1B at arrl.net to contact Mr. Kramer if you have any more questions. This webinar is being live streamed on YouTube and being recorded for later viewing. Be aware there is a strict time limit on the session, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Kramer.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Welcome, I'm Harold Kramer, as Rick just introduced me. I'm here live in my study in Cheshire, Connecticut, South Central Connecticut, where I'm looking at my thermometer. It's about 31 degrees. I'm going to start the presentation here. I have to do some manipulation with PowerPoint. And let's bring it up. And let's hit this key. And Rick, can you see the PowerPoint slide okay? I want to make sure you can see the PowerPoint slide. Can someone tell me in the chat?
Yes, there you go. Okay. Yes, sir, you are good to go. I didn't unmute.
Okay, there we go. Well, again, good morning. I'm Harold Kramer. As Rick said, I retired as the ARL COO in 2016, almost 4 years ago. This is going to be a brief history of the telegraph keys, or how many ways can you make a switch. And this is a personal perspective. It's not an academic course or anything. So I'm going to focus pretty much on straight keys. I've been a key collector since I was pretty young, and I thought I'd talk about some and show you what's in my collection and some other things and a little bit of history. So first, the history. Before the electric telegraph was invented, we could only move information around pretty slowly. The first way was messengers, and even in Roman, Greek times, armies, a messenger would go on foot or on horse possibly. We had lanterns and we had lighthouses. People like Paul Revere, he just couldn't send a text to everybody in those days. He had to use lights, and if the weather was bad, you were in trouble. The other way that information was moved was via flags, drums, and smoke signals. Also kind of limited speed of information and limited by sound and weather conditions. In the end of around 1790 in France, they started putting together a semaphore optical telegraph. Let me get my little pointer here in gear. These little wing things up here would flip around, and they could encode a certain number of letters by having one up, one down, yellow down. These, of course, had to be on hills, and they were limited to, again, to line of sight and to weather conditions. They were first used extensively in the Napoleonic Wars. Information still was moving pretty slowly. We had horses, the Pony Express from 1860 to 1861, coast to coast. It was pretty amazing that they could do it in 10 days. Pretty remarkable for horses. A ship could take up to a month to get across the Atlantic from New York to London. And a locomotive was the next pretty large invention, and that could move at 40 to 50 miles an hour. And mail started on locomotives. Still pretty slow to get a letter. If I wanted to send a letter from where I am in Connecticut down to Florida, it would take me quite a while. That was the case until the invention of the electric telegraph in the 1830s and 1840s. This is an invention that really changed the world. An early telegraph was invented by the British inventors Cooke and Wheatstone in 1837. If you've studied electrical engineering, Wheatstone is the same person who invented the Wheatstone Bridge. And this system was used on the British railway system. It was kind of complicated. These needles pointed to letters. So if you wanted this letter, these two needles would point to it. If you wanted this letter, these two needles would point to it. So it was complicated to run and complicated to decode, but it was used on the British railway system. This kind of code device persisted until Sam Morse came along. The modern era of telegraphy really began with Samuel Finley Breeze Morse. And he was born in 1791 and he died in 1872. Morse was an interesting character. He was actually, before he started the telegraph, he was a very famous painter, particularly for portraits. But the one I'm showing you here, called the Gallery of the Louvre, which was actually 6 feet by 9 feet, was probably his most famous painting. He did this from 1831 to 1833. And what he did was go into the Louvre in Paris and paint a picture of the pictures in the galleries. It sounds kind of weird by today's standards, but this was a very popular painter. Painting. So Morse was a pretty famous guy. There's a lot of stories about how he came up with the idea, but the main thing was that in 1840, he was granted this US patent. And if you read this patent, it is a very broad-based patent. It probably even covers my iPhone. The communicating information on signals with application of electromagnetism. This device that he had is nothing like the final telegraph. This is the battery, I think. This is how it was sent. There was no real formal key per se. Let me get my pointer in the right place here. There was no formal key per se, and it was sent using sort of these sort of bumps that bumped this device, which pulled a counterweight that printed it on some paper. It was, again, a very broad patent, and in the future, it was challenged many times. And Morse was a pretty savvy guy. He was a real good businessman, and he got a lot of international patents on this. He was a businessman. He was a real good lobbyist, had a lot of friends in Congress. He had gone to Yale here in Connecticut. He had a lot of contacts. I always think of Morse as less of an inventor and more of a system integrator, kind of like a guy like Bill Gates or Steve Jobs. He took a bunch of components that existed, electromagnets, batteries, wire, all things today we could buy just about at our local CVS. And he put it together and made it into a system that actually worked. The first time it actually did work was on May 24th, 1844. And he sent this message from Baltimore to Washington, D.C. It was a 38-mile run. And his system, they said, could send 30 characters per minute. And what I find kind of interesting, and I've read it a couple places, it was a one-wire system. The other wire was ground, so couldn't have been real efficient, but it did seem to work. And since he sent it to Congress, he was applauded as the inventor of the telegraph. At first, landline telegraphy used paper registers that printed out the code. These are pictures of 2 paper registers from the Smithsonian. The paper was drawn through these things, and a dit came out as a short blip on the paper, and a dot came out as a longer line on the paper. But these are 2 of the very early instruments. If you can read that on the slide, this is 1849. But after a while, the operators became pretty savvy, and instead of using the paper, they learned how to listen to the sound of the device that hit the paper and made the perforations. So instead of paper, which was slow because you had to rip off the paper, they came out with an electromagnetic sounder. Now I'm going to hold one up here. I have these little tags on everything to keep track of my inventory, but this is the way it sounded. That's the way you copied CW with an electromagnetic sounder. So telegraph offices got equipped with a sounder and a key. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about keys, since I've kind of introduced you to the how the history started. This is Alfred Vale. He was Morse's partner, and he really built this first key. Vale was lived from 1807 to 1859, and he was an excellent machinist. He was the one who was able to build these devices, and he was also co-creator of the Morse code. Some people say it should be called the Vale code, but that's okay. He acknowledged that he and Morse were co-creators of the Morse code. This is what the key looks like. I have one here. This is the key I own. This is a replica, obviously. And on the replica on the front, you can see the tag. The key is what's called the strap key. This is the strap here. There's no spring to hold the tension. And I'm going to show you a little later a couple of other strap keys. The telegraph key evolved. And the first, it was a real free-for-all. No one really knew how to make the best or perfect key. And the first keys were, using that Wheatstone telegraph and Morse were about 1830 to 1840. Landline keys, landline telegraphy using wires, came into effect from 1830 to about 1950, when landlines were still used. But keys that were really usable, particularly for long periods of time, didn't come around until 1888 to the present day. In around 1900, Marconi and others, Hertz, invented wireless, what we call radio, using spark gap transmitters, and they were around for about 20 years. After that, the big invention was by Horace Martin in 1905, who invented the vibraplex bug. And I'm going to show you some military keys from 1904 that are still used today. And then paddles came in the late 1940s when we were able to build the electronics to make them work. So many companies were in the key business, particularly here in New England, where I am in Connecticut, because we had a lot of water power here, a lot of rivers to power things. And we had in Connecticut and New England and New York, a lot of machinists and people who knew how to work with metal, who knew how to work with brass and steel. That's what we did here. So you'll see a lot of the earlier keys have come out of this region. Here's some of the innovations and inventions in the history of the key. The first key was the lever correspondent by Alfred Vale that I just showed you. I'm going to show you a Camelback lever. That was a refinement by Mr. Phelps, who went on to manufacture keys on his own. The big innovation, really, in straight keys came in 1881 when the steel Triumph lever was invented by Jesse Bunnell. And 1905 was the semi-automatic vibraplex key by Horace Martin. And after that, 1910 to 1914, we saw some wireless keys that are a little bit different than all these others. So that's kind of the major innovators and the major names who invented straight keys. Now I'm going to show you what a standard straight key is all about. There's certain components in all of them. First of all, there's a base. I'm showing you on this McElroy Model 200. There's the electrical connections, which are these binding posts over here. There's a fulcrum that lets the lever pivot. There's trunnions, that rhymes with onions, and that's this circular support here. That's a trunnion. There's a lever, it goes up and down. There's a knob. Usually they're black. I've seen one or two red knobs on a key. Some of the British ones are dark brown. There's a spring, which you can just about see in there. That's a coil spring, which was another innovation. in telegraphy, kind of this conical coil spring. And then there's the electrical contacts themselves. If you're old enough like me to remember points on a car, that's kind of what they look like right in there. So when I talk about the history of how these things work, I want to show you the lever. This is a page from Tom Pereira's Telegraph Collector's Guide. Tom gave a presentation last year about telegraphy, and kind of the history of the straight key is sort of the history of the lever. They started out with straight levers and evolved to Camelback, and then they have some keys have step levers, but the majority of keys and most American keys use what's called a triumph lever. It was a triumph because it saved people's arms. When the triumph lever was invented by Jesse Bunnell, and he started at age 11 as a messenger for telegraphers, I guess handing the paper messages back and forth. He was a military telegrapher during the Civil War who promoted himself as Abraham Lincoln's youngest telegrapher. Nobody knows if that's true, but there are pictures of him on the Civil War battlefield as a very young man, 11 years old. And the invention of this triumph lever, which is this lever here, which is steel, reduced or eliminated telegrapher's elbow, which today we'd call tendonitis or carpal tunnel syndrome. They used to use kids, boys mostly, who were 10 or 11 years old as telegraphers, and they'd work many, many hours, and they would burn out their arms. Their arms were very bad, and they couldn't work anymore. It was really a tragedy. There were not child labor laws back then, and a lot of these young telegraphers really ruined their arms. There were many famous young telegraphers. Thomas Edison was a famous young telegrapher, and Sears and Roebuck, supposedly, I won't say supposedly, they were young telegraphers who learned telegraphy and then did many other things. Jesse Bunnell's company was located in New York City, and he also had a factory here in Connecticut, in Milford, Connecticut. And the name Bunnell, if you drive around Milford, Connecticut, you'll see it on a few buildings and a few other things. So it was a pretty big enterprise then. One of the first things that Bunnell and others came up with was kind of a telegrapher's toolbox, which is called a key on board. This took a sounder and a key and put them on a board. Very logical, a key on board. And telegraphers carried these job to job, sort of like an auto mechanic who would carry his or her tools to a job today, or a tradesperson, a carpenter, likes to use their own tools. So that's what these were primarily used for. They were also used as practice sets to learn how to send and how to copy CW. When I spoke earlier, I spoke about the, oops, what happened here? Good grief. Okay, when I talked earlier, I talked about the Camelback key, and this is a Camelback key here. This is the Camelback, the key lever. Let me get my pointer back. This is the Camelback key lever right there, and you can see it has that lump in it. These are really prized by collectors today because they're pretty old. This one here that I'm showing you, I think, is from 1880, which makes it a pretty old device. But the levers still caused a lot of wrist problems. This is a Barclay box, and I'm going to do another live demo here. This was a louder sounder. This is called a Barclay box. Let me see if I can get up here to the camera. It makes a louder noise generally. It hits this block of wood to generate louder CW. These offices were very crowded with operators and sounders, and it was hard to hear sometimes. So Mr. Barclay, he was Western Union's chief engineer, invented a thing that the sounder hit a wood block. They also used metal or wood boxes, sort of like bass reflex speakers. And the most famous one that many hams have heard of is called the Prince Albert Sounder, because it used a can of Prince Albert's tobacco. This next key is kind of unusual. It's called the Steiner key, and it's manufactured by Western Electric. It doesn't have a spring. This little tab here is the spring. It uses it, if you try to send with it, I've tried sending with it, and it's got a kind of a, well, Tom Pereira's described it as kind of a mushy feel. It didn't go very far, but it's kind of a very unusual key made out of brass. This is what it looks like in real time, if you want to get an idea of the size with my hands. And there's that little tab up on the top. This is kind of a combination PowerPoint and real-time presentation. There's the flat spring. Another thing that they had to solve in telegraph office is having keys move around. So most of the keys were leg keys, like this, with two legs that were bolted to the operating table with these wing nuts. I always wondered why it didn't short out, but you can't see it. But in here, there's a rubber bushing that insulates this terminal from the brass base. So that's the way it worked. Anybody who's operated any CW in their shack know that you really got to keep your key fastened down or you're going to have some problems. This next one is called a Spies pole changer key, and it has a switch on it. This is another unusual kind of key. It has a switch that can determine any one of three positions, changes the polarity of the line, which is used to check lines. This is made by Spies Electric Company in Chicago, and I've had this on my website. And a person called Rich Spies contacted me and said, Philip Spies, who made the key, was his grandfather, and he was wondering where he could buy one. So I directed him to eBay. And also, a few months ago, I made a presentation to a club in South Carolina, and one of the people there said her maiden name was Spies, and and her family was from Chicago, and she was going to track it down. So that's kind of an interesting story about that key. Well, this is a wire line key, of course, because it checks polarity of wire lines, but telegraphy evolved into wireless telegraphy right around 1910. And the ARRL was founded in 1914, right at the beginning of radio, just about. So we had to have a different kind of key. We had to use a key that had very heavy-duty contacts. It had to handle very high voltages, 1 kilowatt to 100 kV, and this era was dominated by the Marconi company. The first wireless transmitters were very high voltage. They generated lots of ozone in the shack. They had to use very, very heavy-duty keys. Now, this next one is courtesy of Tom Pereira. And this is a type of key that was used on the Titanic. And their wireless was a Marconi system. Now, this is the CW lever, but this has an emergency switch on the left side that could be used to break the circuit if the contacts became welded together from the high voltage, the high currents. So I guess that happened, that there was so much voltage there that the contact would sometimes arc. And Tom also noted that there was a rope hanging from the ceiling that was attached to the switch, and it could be pull it to disconnect the circuit to the transmitter. So the early wireless spark gap keys had to be pretty heavy duty, even though they followed the same convention. There's a base, there's a lever, there's trunnions, and there's a fulcrum. I'm gonna hope this audio comes through. This is actually audio that was given to me by Dave Ingram, and he claims it was from the Titanic. You'll hear, if you can copy it, you'll hear the MGY, but this is the way spark sounded. So I hope this is going to run. Oh boy, I'm having my problems here. Hold on. Sorry about that. I'll go back to PowerPoint again. Whenever you try and do something a little different, it kind of acts up, I guess.
Harold, it came through low volume.
Oh, okay. I'll try and can you? I'll have to go back down through the slides here. I'm sorry. Hold on one second, and I'll try and get myself recalibrated. I apologize for this delay. Let me just stop sharing and get the PowerPoint where I want it to be. I have to close a few things here and go back down again. You know, it's so difficult for me to talk and run a PowerPoint presentation all at the same time. Okay, I'm back at the right place. So let me go back to screen share on Zoom. And let me screen share this and go to PowerPoint, and this should do it. Am I okay now, Rick?
Share screen.
Oh, I didn't share it. Sorry. Am I back on now?
Affirmative.
Okay. So let me play this a little bit louder for you. Okay, I think enough of that, but you could tell how ragged that is to copy. The next slide I wanted to show you is this other wireless key, which is called the Signal Electric Company Brass Standard Key, R63. And you can see that it has very large contacts there. And it came with a variety of different contacts. It has no shorting bar on it, no circuit closer, because it's a wireless key. Okay. Wait a minute. Let me go to the right one here. This one here is next. Okay, this is an interesting key with a story to it, which I'll try to be brief. When I worked for the ARRL, we found this in the we found a key like this in the ARRL safe. There was always a rumor that there was a Hiram Percy Maxim key floating around. So we found a key that looked just like this in the safe. It's from the 1920s. It's called the W.B. Duck Company Overland key. It was probably used by Hiram Percy Maxim. And Piero Bagali found out about it, and he said he wanted to make some replicas. So we made and sold a bunch of replica keys. It says on the bar, replica by Bagali. And this is one of the replicas. And this is a wireless key. Again, there's no circuit closer. The circuit closer was used to make sure the shorting arm on a sounder stayed down. If the sounder was down, you had continuity on the line. If there was no continuity, this went up, and that's what the circuit closer was used for. But you can always tell a wireless key because there is no closing. Those of us who are hams use that shorting bar usually to tune our transmitters. Amateur radio straight keys proliferated in the 1950s and 70s. They many varieties of keys, all these different types. This is one of the best straight keys I've ever used, is Nye Viking. But there were lots of different kinds of straight keys in the 1950s through the 1970s. This is one of the most popular type keys during that era, and it's a McElroy key. They're teardrop shaped. You can see the teardrop shape here. McElroy began in the late 30s, 1938, 1939. They were made in and around Boston, Massachusetts. The big deal about McElroy keys is McElroy was a champion telegrapher. He could copy almost, I think, 80 words a minute. He held the Guinness World Record at one time. And he was a great promoter, and these are highly valued by collectors, these McElroy keys. Next, we'll go from McElroy to military keys. These were first used during the U.S. Civil War. And military keys had a bunch of characteristics that were necessary for the military. First of all, they were black. They were not reflective keys at all. You didn't want light shining on them, giving away your position. They had enclosed contacts like this J5A here. Since you were operating in environments with diesel fumes and ammunition and all kinds of other things that could explode. So they were flame-proof keys. They were very rugged because you didn't know what sort of conditions they might be in. And many of them were actually physically attached to the operator. I'm going to show you one of those. And many also have this navy knob. Sometimes it's called the mushroom knob. They also had to be very easily serviced in the field. They couldn't have a lot of complicated springs and mechanisms. And I think that's one of the reasons you don't always see an awful lot of bugs as military keys. The J36 is kind of the standard. And they also had to be pretty quiet, not to give away your position. When you see a J on a key, it usually means it's Joint Army Navy Signal Corps key. Of course, now that I said that they have J's, the Navy had a different system, and this C means Navy generally. MI is the manufacturer molded insulator. And this is a pretty nice little key. Let me see if I can find where I put it here. Yeah, this is that key. These little things here are the electrical contacts in the back. And these are the adjustments. This key, for such a strange looking lever, has a very nice feel. It's pretty easy to send CW. There was always a little controversy about this key. Some people say Junkers, I guess that's the way we pronounce it in German, invented this type of key and the Navy copied it. And some people say the Navy invented it. Always been that little controversy. Maybe someone will settle it. This is a J45. It's a military key that is clamped onto your leg. And this is the clamp. So when you're in your tank or Jeep or whatever and you had to operate CW, you clamp that onto your leg and you send CW with it. Now, you can't really see it too well. I'll point it out here on the PowerPoint slide. This is actually a strap key. There's no spring. There's just a metal strap here on this J37, which is a very popular military key. It sends pretty well, but I think maybe they had the strap there so that it wouldn't be a spring to come out or fall apart. It makes it, I think, a little more reliable key. Now, everybody who's a ham and has ever sent CW, I'm sure, has seen a J38. It's one of the most popular keys made. There were many varieties. They were produced by many manufacturers. They were primarily a training key. They were used, I understand, sometime in the field. You can see it has all the parts. It's got the base. It's got the Triumph lever made of steel. It's got the trunnions. It's got a circuit closer lever. I got to wonder what this is for, though. I always wondered. I'm going to show you in the next slide. This little screw eye here, a string or rope or twine or something ran through it to hold these keys on the training desk when they were used for military training. This is what this terminal was used for. It was used to hook up the headphones. Now, if you have a J38 in your collection, or you use it, you really want to look on the bottom if you see that little L. Let's see if we can see it here. Just about. Looks kind of like a 7, but that makes it into a Lionel key, and that's the most valuable one for collectors. And I understand the military did not like people, manufacturers, labeling their keys about who made them. But on a lot of J38s, there are red marks on the bottom. I have a couple with various things impressed in them. J38s were abundant after the war. I remember buying one when I was a kid for 25 cents on Canal Street, New York City, and they send pretty well. This is a scissors key. It's called a J51, and it was used with a signal lamp, an M227 signal lamp, and a 25-foot cable, so that the operator could stay far away from the lamp. Because if the enemy wanted to shoot at the light, you didn't want to be shot, so you wanted to be stand away far from the lamp. And if you see me, this is a real-time version. These are the electrical connections you can see on the end. And we'll see how close this can get. This has like little tiny contacts, points, and it's called the scissors because you hold it like that. So that's the J51. These are WT8. These are from the UK. These are not US military keys. But these have some unique characteristics that are kind of interesting. There's more than 100 different types of these keys, which is incredible. They had many usage, radio, landline. They came with various British transceiver type sets. They're called WT8As because they have 8 amp capacity. And they were used in many countries. The one on the top is from Australia, and it looks a little different than the one on the bottom. They have, this is what one looks like in size. They all have mushroom knobs. This one here, if you've ever owned a British sports car, you know that the British believe in positive ground, that electrons flow from plus to minus. At least they did. So this has a insulated arm, which is very unusual in a key. This one, the key is metal, and the arm is part of the contact. But this one, the arm is insulated, so it's a little bit different than most other keys. But again, they make these in about 100 variations, so you never know quite what you got with one of these. This is a really strange key. It's called the bathtub key. Let me just lean over, sorry, and get it. This is called a bathtub key because it looks like a bathtub, to be obvious. The contacts are completely enclosed to prevent sparks. They were used on bombers. And this is the key knob, and these are the electrical connections over here. This is what it looks like, a bathtub key. Now when you flip it over, I'm going to show you the next slide. Inside is sort of the upside down key, they call it. And you can see how that works like that. And if you close it, you can, I don't want to push it because it sticks sometimes. You can take this little hinge thing and it'll make it closed, watertight, and it'll turn the key on. The SPST switch will close and it'll send out a continuous tone so that anybody parachuting out can be located. I understand these keys were also used on rafts for the British for the same reason. Now, I said earlier here in Connecticut, we made a lot of different brass items. This one is a little, not quite as serious as the other keys, but I think it's important because these toys were very popular and they encouraged inspiring telegraphers and radio operators. This was made in Meriden, Connecticut, the next town over from where I am, maybe 10 miles from where I'm sitting here in Cheshire, Connecticut. This was a toy key set, a 3-way telegraph set. And there were lots and lots of different toy keys that were available to young kids who wanted to learn how to be a telegrapher and radio operator. Maybe some of you wanted to become hams after fooling around with telegraphy as a kid. Now, last time I showed that on a slide, somebody said to me, I can't read the writing. So here's what it says, which is pretty cool. What a swell way to learn the Morse code. My speed gets better every day. So I'm going to wrap it up here with that. I just want to say that some of the references, and if you would like to pursue this topic further, some of the references I used in this presentation were The Story of the Key. That's his book here on the left. To get it, you have to Google Morse and Magnificent. I'm not quite sure if it's still available. They seem to still have it. And the other one was still in publication, which is Tom Pereira's book, The Telegraph Collector's Guide. And his website is just a treasure trove of telegraphy information and kind of the definitive site for this kind of information. So that's it for me. Thanks very much. And now I can take some questions. I'm going to lose the screen share and go back to my study here. And if there are any questions, I hope I can answer them. Thanks for your attention here on Zoom. Not so easy.
All right, David. Mr. Kramer, can you see the Q&A box?
Let me open it up. Yes, I can see it.
Okay, I have one question that's not in there. It comes from Bill Whelan. He says, what are your 2 favorite keys of all times? Which is preferred and why?
Oh, I'm always asked that, and I always have trouble answering it. Um, I guess my favorite key of all time is that Chrome McElroy Deluxe 300 that I had on that picture with McElroy. I don't have it down here. So I think that's my favorite straight key of all time. I think the ham key one that I showed on that slide with 4 keys, that's the nicest sending straight key I've ever used. As far as I don't use straight keys anymore, I use paddles. I've used a Bencher BY1 for many years, and I also use a Bengali simplex paddle. Okay, but I send a lot of computers, DW. Thank you. From David. Good morning to all present. Okay. Rick, how should I handle these questions? Should I start at the top? Can I name paddles manufactured between 1950 and 1960? Wow. I don't know. There were some early ones. The Autronics is generally attributed to be the early ones. There might have been the early Vibraplex one in 1960. I don't know. I've been researching it a little more. I thought maybe to write a QST article about the early history of paddles because I had never seen one. But there were not very many then until we got the circuit, and I think the integrated circuit Curtis Keyer chip really brought paddles into the mainstream. And Keith wants to know, what was the shorting bar used for? Well, like I said earlier, the shorting bar kept the lever down on a sounder. So when you were in your office, the bar was always down, so you had continuity on the line. When the continuity broke, for whatever reason, the thing went up. So that's why you kept this circuit closer switch on all the time. You kept it closed and you had a complete circuit. Okay. Can you get a copy of use for our Boy Scout program? Sure, just send me an email, wj1b@arl.net. Okay. Let me see, where are we here? What are the key you were showing that has a knob to table height of less than 2 inches compared to the European knobs, which are higher? I don't really know the answer to that. I know most American keys have the flat knob, except the military keys, and most European keys I've seen have the mushroom knob. Can you find the K4W? No, but that's a good idea, and maybe I'll post it on my website. Oh, why no Russian keys? I didn't show any international keys except the UK key. I do have some Russian keys in my presentation, but international keys would probably be a separate presentation. I just didn't have the time here. How long have I been collecting keys? Since I was a kid. But luckily, when I worked for the ARL, I had the opportunity to go to many hamfests, and I always picked one or two up as a souvenir. And they fit in my suitcase as opposed to a Johnson Ranger 3 or a Helicopter's S38B. I could always shove one in. Why is a Vibraplex considered a straight key? They're not really. They're semi-automatic keys, even though Vibraplex does make straight keys today. But the Vibraplex semi-automatic is what most people think of as a Vibraplex key. Have I ever used a Monkey key? No, I have not. Okay, this is great. I have a J38 that I took off a ship when I was in the Navy. What does a JJ stand for? I don't know. But there are websites where you can look up. If you Google J38, there are a couple of websites that just focus on the J38. J itself means joint Army Navy. Novice question. Was there a particular danger of working with the high voltages? Yes. Yes. Not only from the high voltages, but I've read articles about Marconi's transmitter shaft where you could really get sick from the ozone generator from the early spark transmitters. Yeah. They were in Vibraplex moved to Norcross, Georgia for a few years. They were also in Alabama for a few years. Now they're in Nashville with Scott Robbins. And Joe, I see your call there, but I don't see a question. Okay. I think that's about the questions, and I think we're just about on time.
Very good to time. I do have.
Okay, somebody posted the link to Morse Magnificent. Okay. What was the maximum speed of a sounder? I've heard 25, 30 words a minute, but I don't know. And do I have any comments on Cootie keys? No, they're the single lever. Bunnell made a lot of them. Let's see. And I think that's it. Okay.
Reed Washington in the chat asked the best place to purchase older keys to start a collection.
Well, I used to say go to a lot of hamfests and conventions, but now I would have to say go to eBay. And the other way is ask people who are hams, who are CW people, if they know of any keys. If you're real dedicated, I've picked up a few at local antique guys. Those big emporium type things, where you go in there and you say, I collect telegraph keys, and if you have any, give me a call or send me an email. And I've gotten a couple that way. But the most keys are on eBay. There are a few on QRZ.com, but most are on eBay. And the rarest ones I've picked up have been at hamfests or people I know who say to me, I have a key, they see it on my website. Oh, thank you, Charles. And what is your CW paddle speed? That depends on if it's a contest, you got to run 25, 30 words a minute. Normal QSO runs a lot slower than that. Okay.
All right, Mr. Kramer, just to be advised, there is a Vibroplex webinar coming up on at 1 o'clock if everybody wants to look at that. And we do appreciate your time and all the people with their questions. Is there any last questions to be typed in the question and answer, please?
Okay. That was sort of a speed session of answering questions. I wish we had more time, but okay.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kramer, for your help. Thanks all the participants, and y'all have a great evening and afternoon.
Okay, thanks. Bye.